Praise the Lord, family. This is Dr. C. Dexter Wise III. Whether you know it or not, right now, the United States of America is not only at war with Iran abroad, it is in the middle of a civil war at home. I said it is in the middle of a civil war at home. South versus North, red versus blue, Republican versus Democrat, urban versus rural. The reason why many people have missed or overlooked this civil war is because it is a war on paper, a war on paper. However, the fact that it's on paper doesn't mean that it's any less dangerous, divisive, consequential. It's on paper, but it's still serious. Presidential executive orders, they're on paper. Departmental policies, changes, on paper. Baseless criminal indictments, on paper. Project 25, all on paper, but war nonetheless. On April the 29th, 2026, the United States Supreme Court ruled in a 6-3 ruling in Louisiana versus Calais that Louisiana's 2024 congressional map, which included 2 majority black districts, was an unconstitutional racial gerrymander. Translation: Louisiana had 2 black districts, but because of the Supreme Court, now they only got 1. This was a reminder of the fact that for the entire history of our nation, there have been those whose primary objective it has been to remain in power and to do so by negating the existence, the presence, and the potency of black people and their vote. From the very beginning, blacks have never had the majority in terms of political power, but they've always held and been the balance of power. We've never been in the majority, but if we were actually honestly given our rights, we could shift the balance either way. This goes back as far as the 3/5 compromise. Remember that in 1787? That agreement between the northern states and the southern states during the United States Congressional Convention, it determined that only 3 out of every 5 enslaved people would be counted for both congressional and federal taxation. In other words, they tried to dehumanize us by declaring us 3/5 of a person. Then, as a result, they denied us the right to vote, which meant we did not have the right to self-determination, nor did we have a right to participate in our nation's direction by them hearing our voice. Well, as you know, it all came to a head in 1861 when the first shots were fired by the Confederates on Fort Sumter in South Carolina. Then what had been a paper civil war became a real civil war. And when the ink of the previous civil war on paper began to turn into blood, real lives were lost and a nation barely survived. After the defeat of the South in the Civil War came the 14th Amendment, which guaranteed that everyone born in the United States or naturalized in the United States was a citizen of the United States of America. By the way, this is what Donald Trump is trying to get rid of. But that included slaves. So that meant because of the 14th Amendment, slaves were full citizens of the United States. Then right behind that came the 15th Amendment, and that was put on paper too. And that gave slaves and every citizen the right to vote. So now, with these 2 amendments passing, the power of the black electorate was unleashed. With the 14th and 15th Amendment, the power of black people voting was unleashed. And between 1865 and 1877, there were more than 2,000 black people elected to office in the South during Reconstruction. Well, since they could no longer legally prevent black people from voting, the Southern establishment pulled out their pens and once again wrote laws which sought to disqualify black people from voting. So let me recap what just happened. First, they tried to dehumanize us and just call us 3/5 of a person. Then they tried to deny us, and even with the right to vote, they attempted to disqualify us from voting. They used things like poll taxes, grandfather clauses, literacy tests, whites only primaries, and more to suppress and neutralize the black vote. And it worked for almost 100 years until the passage of the Voter Rights Act in 1965, when those Jim Crow laws were outlawed. Now, once that act passed in 1965, just like it had happened during the Reconstruction, again, the black power and the unleashing of the vote of black powers, it was felt. That culminated in the election of Barack Obama as the first black president, he won twice, of the United States of America, and Kamala Harris as the first black female vice president. Now, history is repeating itself. History is repeating itself. You know, they said we couldn't have another Obama. He snuck through, but they ain't gonna let that happen again. So they pulled out their pens once again and began to redraw congressional districts on paper. The Supreme Court ruled that the 1965 Voter Rights Act was no longer needed, and it gutted its teeth, and here we are again. First, war in Texas on paper, war in California on paper, war in Virginia on paper, war in Alabama on paper, war in Tennessee on paper, and who knows which state is next. What I'm trying to get you to see is that what is happening right now is not new. In fact, it's the same old story. White people retain power, but in order to do so, they have to rob black people of their power. They don't do it with guns. They don't do it with knives. They don't do it with swords. How do they do it? They do it on paper. They draw lines on paper. They have rules handed down from the Supreme Court on paper. They write laws and put it on paper. And then they do it in such a way that the paper rules the day. Well, if history teaches us anything, it teaches us that this wave of suppression and neutralization of black people, this is going to pass too. One of the things that reminds me of this and encourages me is that George Wallace didn't live forever. But let's hope that this time, when this wave is happening, when this civil war is happening on paper, let's hope that the nation figures out a way for blacks and other minorities, for that matter, to secure their rights and representation peacefully, civilly, and quickly, and make sure that they do it, write it on indelible ink on paper.